Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Alistair, for inviting us back. I had the privilege of addressing ADSB with this august audience 2 years ago in Florida, and now we're 2 years closer. And I'm sorry, folks, but here's where we're at. If everyone remembers, January 1st, 2020, all aircraft operating in Class A airspace above 18,000 feet, which is where the business jet and turboprop community live, will be required to have ADSB. In addition to that, aircraft that operate close to major metropolitan areas in the US, which is the vast majority of general aviation, and including helicopters out in the Gulf, are going to need ADSB. If we look at where we're at from a compliance standpoint, this is data that I need to cite Duncan Aviation for. They gave us this last Friday. Their current numbers, just right this second, are at only a 52.2% compliance, and there's only 13 months to go. Turboprops are even worse off. We're at less than 30% compliance. The helicopter world takes up the trail at only 14% compliance. Guys, there's only 13 months left. The piston world is even in worse shape. For a total of only 22.2% compliance today. This data is 3 days old. The FAA has just a bit different approach. This is as of November 1st off the FAA website. There are 66,803, which is about 30% of the unregistered fleet in the US. Interestingly enough, only 90% are good installs. Over almost 10% at this point, or NPE, are not good installs. That means the equipment's installed in the aircraft, but it's not meeting the performance specifications required to be certified. That curve that you're looking at there is at about a 3% per month implementation rate. So if we take and just straight line that out to January 1st, 2010, only 101,000 aircraft, or just under 50%, will be implemented by the mandate. And of that, good installs are going to improve, but we're still at a 4% installation rate that we anticipate will fail. Guys, that's less than 50%. Now, admittedly, I think a large number of those aircraft are going to be single-engine pistons that are probably worth less than $60,000 on the market and may not be economically reasonable to upgrade as required. Why should we upgrade now? I shared this 2 years ago. Here's the same list. The deadline may move. No. Operators may face, and you'll note may is now crossed out, they will face lengthy delays. The backlog crunch we were forecasting is now a reality. The component shortages is now a reality. The more expensive install in prices now as we get closer is now a certainty. Non-compliant aircraft will be grounded. They are not going to extend the date. In the reauthorization bill in Congress this past year for the FAA, the mandate for ADSB implementation was hardwired in. It will not change. And then there's a significant decrease forecast that we're forecasting for aircraft that are not compliant in Q1 2020. And Joe's going to talk more about that here momentarily. There's 412 days left as of today. Are we off to the elephant in the room? Let me ask Chuck you've got some comments on the equipment?
Equipment.
The next slide, Zach.
Yeah. All right, so one of the things I like to do when I'm out talking about ADSB, and I know one of the drags on adoption is that our customers are having and struggling with this need to update, and they feel like they're just spending money. And so I keep coming back to helping people understand this is an infrastructure update that the FAA has set out to do, and it's extremely important for us as an industry. There's three elements into management or the air traffic management system, and communications, navigation, and surveillance. They work together. And to complete this next-gen goal and really transition our air traffic management system out of the old analog and into the digital era, ADS-B is a critical component. It really is going to set the stage for what the FAA is going to do next. And of course, around the world, it's become the standard for surveillance in airspace. So, you know, when you're talking to your customers or when you're out there looking at it, understand that ADS-B is going to go on January 1. It has to. The infrastructure is dependent on ADS-B being there, and that's why it's a mandate. So it's really, and there is a lot of benefits from it, so we can talk about that later. But next slide. As Alex was saying, our estimates are fairly similar within our fleet. We're down to about the last year, and as far as Rockwell Collins and what we see as our fleet, we're in that 40% compliance rate. And that means 60% of our customers have to update in the last 12 months of this mandate. Bullet number 3 is really what I want to emphasize. The capacity at the MROs, every dealer we talk to is 8 to 9 months out. And lead times. We had a customer recently talk to us about a bulk buy of 1,000 transponders. So, you know, if you are sitting on your hands, I can only beg you to get off, get your purchase orders in, and it's not just Rockwell. I talk quite closely with our competitors at Honeywell and Garmin. You're going to see much of the same thing happen. It's just the delay in the adoption has really driven us into quite a problem here in 2019. The next slide, please. So what I want to highlight here is at the top of this slide is our Rockwell Collins ADS-B page, and on that ADS-B page we actually have a drop-down and filtering system where you can type in your aircraft type, and you can see all the various STCs that are available for your airplane. And we've got quite a variety out there. We know some of these older aircraft need a little bit more than just ADS-B. So we do have some flight deck options, full flight deck retrofits, as well as some modernization packages. And you know, the key to the modernization packages is actually on the next slide. In that post-2020 environment, as we shift and assume, the government's going to assume that ADS-B is implemented, they're going to shift their focus onto the navigation and the communications aspect of this air traffic management. And the performance-based nav will be, it's already started. They've got a lot of new SIDs and stars they've published under the performance-based nav spec. But that's going to be the next step. And so when you're working with your aircraft or your clients, definitely make sure you're engaging with your MRO and the avionics shop to really understand your airplane and what are the capabilities beyond that ADS-B that it might need, just to make sure that you're really ready for that post-2020 environment. That's what I have.
Super. And I think, Joe, you've got some comments?
Yes, oh, good, it is working. Go ahead and start it whenever you want.
As soon as they put it up.
Okay, I'm going to bring into attention one of the things Alex already brought up. I'm going to do a little bit more of a recap. The airspace compliance requirements are going to be on the next slide a little bit. Oh, thank you. Gee, now how do I flip my pages? I got it. Which is this one? Green.
Yeah, the big green button.
Okay, the current situation, Alex has alluded to some of it. Problems with the bad installations, and the bottom line is, how's this going to affect values? Very quickly, if an airplane is flying anywhere over 10,000 feet, which is pretty much all the corporate aircraft that we deal with, it's going to be part of the factors for it. Less than half of the business jets in operations are currently in compliance. And I will multitask, I promise. There it is. Out of the 4,800 repair stations, only about 1,400 can still install ADS-B out. Interestingly enough, there is, what is my statistics here saying? About 135 of these MROs are in the Florida area alone, as a little bit of a note. At the current rate, upgrades that are available to be done is about 200 per month. Here's a similar slide. I think one of the key points that needs to be brought into consideration here, yes, the numbers are up there. There's been about 60,000 some odd installations done. The key is that 10% of these aren't worth. There's been some modifications to the regulations that these are upgrades to the existing upgrades that have not been done. So they need to be back into the shop at some point and taken care of. So the problems with the non-performing, incorrect software, the emitters, small aircraft versus light aircraft, they're putting out the wrong signal, whether it's the wrong weight classification, and even incorrect IDs. These are just a couple of the items that are coming into effect. I mean, they're transmitting while the aircraft are on the ground. So these are the problems with that 10% that we talked about. There's a compliance check tool at the FAA website that kind of gives you a little bit better insight to the resolution of some of these problems. So now, the impact on aircraft compliance. This is probably what everybody's interested in knowing. Oops. We use a sliding scale. I mean, for the last several years, probably in 2016, we were using probably, if you had ADS-B or let's just round it out to next generation avionics upgrades so that it covers all the pieces, fans 1A, CPDLC, et cetera. Back in 2016, we were giving it about 100% value added for that being done because there were still 4 years into the process. As 2017 rolled around, we started reducing the amount of impact to the value to it. We started giving it 75%. And those that didn't have it would give it the full 100%. So as time went on, we are currently, here at 2016, it was a negative 25% if they didn't have it, we gave it 75% if they did. 2017, it was a 50-50 split if they had it, if they didn't have it. That was a value impact to it from an appraisal perspective. In the current year today, we're giving it a 75% deduct if it's not on there, and just a 25% add-on if it is. And simply for the fact that these aircraft, if you have it, it's going to be selling a little bit quicker, it's going to be more desirable, less time on market, so there is a value and impact to it. As we come into 2019, any aircraft that does not have ADS-B out, we're going to give, there is no value added to it, it's the full cost of whatever that installation would be. And one of the things that comes into play also is, as we get closer towards the end of the year, we're probably going to start impacting it at least 125% of the cost, because there's not going to be facilities to be able to do it. The equipment is going to be very difficult to handle. There's just not enough capacity. Currently, we're doing it, the capacity is about 200 aircraft per month, but in reality, they need approximately 400 aircraft a month in order to maintain the amount of aircraft that are needed. Some of the things that come into play are as Alex mentioned, the equipment cost is going to be a lot more. Up until now, there was probably a lot of situations where if you planned ahead, you brought in your aircraft, and then you were able to do an upgrade to the existing equipment. Now since now there's a shortage of parts and none of these parts are available, you're looking at more to the tune of overhaul exchanges, which is a cost affiliated with these things. And then again, as time goes on with the older aircraft, you're going to require special engineering, probably electrical load analyses and things of that nature. The best thing for those that still haven't done it is, hey, find yourself a slot if there's still any available, because the best time to perform these is during a pre-purchase inspection or during a heavy maintenance visit. Very few of the MROs are going to be accepting aircraft just for the upgrades. There's just not enough slots on there. One of the windfall benefits of the not having the next gen is going to be for the charter companies. They're going to see a short-term uptick in charter services, because a lot of these airplanes that are not in compliance are going to be grounded on January 1st, 2020. Duncan Aviation estimates up to 20% of the non-compliant aircraft are going to be retired and removed from service. So I think we're looking at a natural weeding out of some of these aircraft that have been on the market or have been flying for a long time, and there's just not going to be cost-effective modifications to them. And I leave it open for questions.
And now we'll turn it over to the floor. Lou.
Our 23 aircraft, is there Can you comply without only, like?
Yes, you can.
You can.
ADS-B out is what the compliance requirement is, not ADS-B in and out. And that's for all aircraft. They just want to know where the aircraft is. So ADS-B out is the compliance requirement. It's awful quiet. 2 years ago, there was a fervor in here.
I think you've depressed everyone. What type of impact on the pre-owned aircraft sales market do you foresee non-compliance having?
Joe, I think that's yours.
And I think that is definitely, let me read this. What time? Well, we're going to see a lot longer days on market. You know, one of the things that one of the earlier panels were saying that, you know, the percentages on market is critical but, you know, we need to look at various factors now because the days on market can be affected because some of these aircraft will not have the opportunity, and then you're looking at other things that come into play with these aircraft that are pre-owned and don't have the equipment. Now they're looking at not being able to be sold on a timely basis, and you're looking at active storage of these aircraft, which adds additional cost to the, to the term of the sale of that aircraft.
A question for the gentleman from Rockwell Collins. As an appraiser, I'm always numbers oriented, and I know that it's difficult for you to provide an exact number for a particular model of airplane. But can you give sort of a range of costs that one would expect? As an appraiser, I need to recognize that many of the airplanes I'm looking at don't have ADS-B. So I'm just wondering what would be a reasonable number that I can use as a way to adjust. Thank you.
It's highly dependent on the age of the aircraft, as you can quite imagine. One of the things that we ran into here in the United States was when the rest of the world was progressing down the surveillance roadmap, they were implementing enhanced surveillance flight ID, and remember all of those in Europe and what have you, and in Canada. In the United States, we didn't do that. And so what happened was we have a large number of aircraft out there that were built in the 90s and the early 2000s that hadn't had some of that prerequisite stuff done. And so that really kind of drove the cost up significantly for those airplanes. The second factor is, do they have were they in 2009 when WAS and LPV? So it really, that vintage of the airplane, the older airplanes we're seeing, you know, probably in that $70,000 to $75,000 is probably an area, depending upon how much they want to do. You know, some of the late model CJ4s or early model CJ4s, you know, it's $25,000, $30,000. If they're doing the FMS update at the same time, which is a critical component, you know, there's going to be add-ons there. So you see anywhere from 30 to, you know, it could be 150, 200 plus, depending upon how much they do. Yep.
I should note for the audience, if you're strictly going for ADS-B out compliance, there is still SLAP 1 or 2 Mode S ADS-B out transponders into the cockpit, Band-Aid it, and the aircraft is compliant. The issue with that is you're going to end up with a non-standard aircraft. You're not going to be able to take advantage of LPV approaches or any of the other benefits of next gen, but that is a way to get there by band-aiding the aircraft. I'd hate to see you do it, but that is a legal way to do it.
As it relates to the question that was put up here, is there an opportunity for cash buyers to pick up non-ADS-B aircraft at well below market values? Yes and no, because in a lot of ways, if they're not compliant, you're just buying somebody else's problem. So therefore, if you happen to have the equipment and are able to make the modifications yourself or have a slot available to you, yes, there might be opportunities there. But the key is you're looking at the fact that everybody's going to have the same problem. If you happen to have the equipment, well, then and hoarded it, and you could find yourself some opportunities. What we've been finding here currently in our comparative analyses when we're doing appraisals, that the larger cabin aircraft, they tend to all be, for the most part, be in compliance. Where we're trying to where we're finding the disconnect as we start getting in the mid to smaller class of aircraft, there just doesn't seem to be the urgency that you see in the mid to larger craft aircraft for compliance to the ADS-B regulations. You know, and like Chuck alluded to, I mean, 2020 is just the beginning of this. There's going to be other updates, and I mean, we're talking now about ADS-B out, but you know, you have the follow-on of ADS-C out, and then it's just going to keep building from there. So just because we have the primary mandate, there's already been revisions to it. The deadline's not going to change, but there will be revisions that are probably going to do additional upgrades.
To answer the question of why do you think owners are still delaying?
Yeah.
I think there's this praying that it'll get cheaper as it gets closer, and just the opposite is occurring. The larger issue is not just the equipment, but the MRO space to get it done. The MRO houses are full. I spoke with Duncan last Friday, and they confessed to me that they may not be able to cover all 100% of their existing customer base. So if you're not already a Duncan customer, what do you think your chances are of getting in?
On that question, why are they still delaying too? I think another part of that is, I think it's education. I think we haven't done the best job that we could have as an industry to help our industry understand the value of ADS-B in that broader picture of the infrastructure. Much of our routing structures is based on literally World War II technologies. You know, the primary radar system that's out there today, it's an analog radar system. And, you know, aviation has grown quite a bit since then. And this is all about, you know, safety and capacity and efficiencies. So in order for us to keep growing as an industry, we have to do an infrastructure update, and we all will benefit from it. And I think that's been a part of it. The other part of it is how many of us spend money before we have to. It's just a human behavior to try and incentivize people to try and spend money ahead. It's really, really hard. But and the more we can do over these coming months to help educate our customers and understand how important this is to our industry, I think it's going to help a bunch. So just ask for everybody's help here and keep communicating the message and the value proposition. FAA's got a lot of good information on their website around the next gen, so it's always a resource.
You know, the key is the proper planning to do this. In a lot of cases, they have maintenance visits they haven't factored in, or if they're just waiting to see if something changes for it. I see this question here about if an aircraft is not compliant by the date, can it not fly, or will it just have restricted conditions of flying? The scuttlebutt we're hearing is that, yes, it will be able to fly if you want to fly below 10,000 feet and just burn fuel like it's going out of style. The other side of it is they will, from what I understand, they will be giving out one-time ferry permits to take it to an MRO for maintenance to have the upgrades done.
Well, and even below 10,000 feet, if you're within a metropolitan area that has Class Bravo airspace,
exactly, but
or that
I
has
was
Class
just more
Charlie airspace, forget it.
Well, I was just more alluding to that. I mean, nobody was going to want to have that type of fuel burn at that cost. The cost is just prohibitive.
Alex, quick question. It's outside of ADS-B, but any idea where things stand on FANS 1A?
I'm sorry?
On FANS 1A, the
Oh,
European-
yeah, over the NAT tracks. I presented that 2 years ago as well. FANS 1A compliance, which is the requirement to have not only ADS-B, but CPDLC for satellite communication across the North American tracks. That's not going to move either. And as I understand it, there are now multiple acceptable standards. Chuck, do you know, are we down to a final decision? Because it was due fourth quarter last year.
No, the FANS 1A project has moved along very well, and we are seeing a pretty good adoption of our FANS 1A solutions. But yeah, I think it's February 2020, they go the expanded or full expansion of the requirement from 290 and above in all 6 regions of the North Atlantic. So it is real. It will stick. And if you are not FANS 1A equipped and you want to go across, you're not going to be able to unless you can go below 2.9, which is not a viable option. So you'll end up going the old blue spruce routes up and around. But yeah, that's as far as the North Atlantic. That's absolutely on track.
To the question that's up there about what about offshore facilities, EASA's requirement for ADS-B compliance is not very far behind. It's June of 2020. The last time I pulsed a couple of MROs in Europe, they were now charging to just make a reservation. So they've figured out how to make money before your aircraft even gets into the shop. Give them credit for that.
I wanted to comment to your point about the FAA and flying wise. So from the NBAA Leadership Committee on the maintenance side of the house, we are working with the FAA currently, and you got basically a couple different situations. If you're an aircraft, so think about it, if you're an aircraft that did comply, January 1st you have an equipment failure, you have something else going on, we're trying to get a very clear path from the FAA to say this is what you do, here's the procedure. Right now what we've been told is you can call, in essence, the airspace or the different towers or facilities that you would fly through, and they can either accept and say, yes, you're allowed to fly through my airspace being non-ADS-B compliant, or they can say, no, I'm sorry, we're too busy. The one thing that we know for sure is that there will be a lot of demands being put on the FAA in early January when this happens, and they do not have the resources. They've flat out said, look, when all these requests come in, and even whether you're looking at a ferry permit to take it to a maintenance facility, don't count on us getting back to your operators very fast. So I will say that, as I said, the maintenance leadership on that from NBAA, we're working with the FAA to try to put out clear guidance for all operators. This is what you do if you decide not to comply or you're not done, and oh, by the way, this is what you do also if you have an aircraft that you did comply and you have an equipment issue of some type. So stay tuned on that. It is coming, and we are working on that with the FAA.
But if I can comment back to that operationally, I believe that's a bit analogous to the operations of IFR operations versus VFR operations. How many times have VFR operations been refused flight following because the airspace is saturated with IFR operations? So if you've got ADS-B operations that have saturated airspace, the probability of getting a non-ADS-B approval is 0.
I 100% agree with that.
And the reality is, I don't think the ATC controllers are going to be too anxious about it because it means they have to manually track that aircraft. And I'm sorry, but the airspace is just too busy, particularly around the high-demand metropolitan areas. New York TRACON, Los Angeles TRACON, Miami TRACON, forget it. Sorry, I have a strong opinion on that one.
I see there's a couple of questions relative to our methodology for the deduction of 125%. Is 125% enough for a deduction if the aircraft is grounded? No, because the 125% would just be for an estimate of what the cost of the equipment plus the premium for getting it done. Now, the other part of that, you're going to have some downtime, and that could easily click past 30 days, and for most Chapter 5 maintenance manuals, you're looking at active storage of some kind. So there is an additional cost that needs to be factored in, and when you're looking through the records, there would be proper documentation of things of that nature. When would we kick in the 125%? Well, if we're kicking in the 100% here coming at the beginning of next year, I would say probably no later than the middle to latter part of next year before it starts going into full pledge. Because now we're looking at equipment that's just not going to be available. We follow this on a pretty regular basis. Every time we do get an appraisal assignment where we have to quote the upgrade, we're starting to see the tweaks of it going up. So on a case-by-case basis, we would make the adjustments accordingly.
And what else have we got?
How would you appraise a non-equipped aircraft in quarter 4 of 2019? Whew. Well, similar. We would have, we'd get the proper quotes from the various MROs for what the cost, see what the time frame would be before they could possibly get someone in there. And we would factor in, again, all the various typical costs that would be involved when an aircraft is put down for an extended period of time. So there is a value impact to it, and there's the perception from the buyer that for the appraised value at that point that there's an extended time on ground that was it properly stored during that time period.
If I may, for those with portfolios, banks and leasing companies, be very, very, very thorough in your inventory and your review, particularly of aircraft that are coming off lease in 2019. I have a few friends who do have jets coming off lease in 2019, and I've ask them about ADS-B compliance, and their response has just been a big Cheshire cat grin. Oh, well, we're leasing a brand new aircraft here when this one comes off lease in 2019. We don't care. Not our problem. I know there were comments made yesterday on the fact that several banks have inventoried their portfolios very carefully. I would advocate that you not just inventory them, but programmatically manage those updates to make sure that your clientele are fully compliant by the end of December.
Right.
I'd have to agree with you on that, Alex. Just to piggyback on it, if you're asking them, they're not in compliant, at this point you should be having copies of the quotes that they received for when they're going to be put in and if they have a slot available to them.
Right, and on that sensible advice, I think the most depressing thing is the discussion that we're now talking about ADS-C. So in 30 years' time, join us for the ADS-Z panel. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you
Alistair,
very much.
it's a very good point. And as Chuck pointed out during his opening comments, this is just the first step in a longer step process for future air navigation systems. This is not a one thing and we can all relax now. We're going to be moving on to digital communication data links. We're going to be moving on to ADS-C, which is satellite-based ADS-B, and there will be additional infrastructure upgrades requirements on an ongoing basis. So this is the gift that keeps on giving.
But not to leave it on the gloom and doom, you got to realize we've been talking about the glass being half empty. There is a significant number of aircraft who meet the lift capabilities that are already compliant. So therefore, we should not have to, yes, it is a problem for a small percentage of the market, but the airplanes are not going to stop flying because of it. So the sky is falling, but it's not falling as fast as we think it should.
Great, and on that note, thank you very much.
Thank you.